When the iPhone launched in 2007, we were known as the mobile guys. And so we were inundated because everybody needed an app. In the US, we did a preliminary design for Tinder. And so we want to try and, de-risk that startup journey for mature founders.
On today's episode of the OpenVC, we get to speak to Oliver Palmer, who is a founder turned investor that sold his startup TigerSpike for over $85 million. TigerSpike was a really innovative mobile technology business, and now Oliver spends his time as a co-founder of DQventures, which is a venture builder helping founders de-risk their startup journey. It's a great episode for both founders and investors. Let's get stuck in. But just before we do, let me introduce this week's sponsor of the OpenVC podcast, Intercom.com. Intercom help founders by making your customer service 24/7. Through their use of innovative AI, you can answer 50% of your customer needs instantly. Intercom is offering 1 year free if you use the code OpenVC, all in caps, at the checkout using the link in the description below. Thanks to Intercom for sponsoring, and let's get back to the episode. Thank you for coming on to the first season of the OpenVC. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. So you've been a man of the world, having lived in multiple countries. I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning. So you were born in Cape Town and then grew up in Nairobi. What were your parents doing out in Africa?
Yeah, so I was born in Cape Town in 1976. My father was a diplomat in the British Foreign Office, so he was posted to various places around Africa. So there's the sort of family that sort of trailed around behind him. Wherever he went, we sort of followed along. We moved to Nairobi in 81 until 92 when I came back to the UK. So it was an amazing sort of childhood. And then, moved back, did my A-levels in the UK, and then I went to university in Durham for 3 years, and then I went traveling after university, and I got as far as Sydney, and I never left. So I had 14 years in Sydney, got married, had kids, and then we spent 8 years in Singapore, and now we're back in Sydney. So that's my life traveling the world in a nutshell.
Awesome. In terms of Sydney, I love it. I'd love to spend a few years there if I can. But you being a young, recent grad, you found your way into quite an exciting startup in a boring space, if that's fair.
It was a fascinating space at the time. 99, I started working for Global Gossip, which is what you're referring to. It was a chain of internet cafes. One of the jobs we had as people working in the stores was to teach people how to use email and to actually set them up with a Hotmail account. So a lot of backpackers and travelers and people would arrive in Sydney as their first stop, and they didn't have email. So they would come into the store and they would pay us $25 to set up a free Hotmail account for them. And then they would travel around the country, and at every sort of tourist backpacker trail, whether it was Melbourne, Byron Bay, Darwin, Cairns, there would be a Global Gossip shop. And so we were sort of a hub for backpackers, but it was super early on in the days of the internet, and websites were just sort of starting to emerge, 97, 98. And the guys who came up with the concept were very forward thinking. And just to carry on that story a little bit, one of the fascinating things was just the way the company kind of went towards the end. I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting in 99, 2000 with Vodafone, who were saying that they wanted to provide a SIM card for every traveler who arrived in Australia, every backpacker who came in, and they would brand it Global Gossip. And the founders at the time were like, no, that's not our thing. We provide fixed internet services for people to sit down and use a computer. Nobody's going to come in with their laptop. Nobody's going to have a mobile phone and travel around. It's just kind of not going to happen. And to me, that was fascinating, to just sort of have your core, which was providing internet access, but then not to sort of see where things were going. And not that I'm any better at it than they were, but just the sort of, you look back and you think that must have been one of such a key decision, because the company's changed and it sort of, nobody goes to an internet cafe anymore, but everybody's got a mobile phone. So just a really interesting insight into kind of how you've got to keep adapting and keep changing as an entrepreneur. You can never just rest on your laurels and think you've kind of got it solved.
Was that your first experience of entrepreneurship, actually joining that startup, or had you had a few ventures before then?
No. So my business partner at TigerSpike, he'd had all sorts of ventures. He was selling T-shirts at school, and he'd tried to make money in all sorts of different ways. I hadn't at all. I graduated from university, went traveling, and one of the first jobs I got in Australia was working with Global Gossip. I think the biggest thing it taught me was that you didn't need to be anyone special to start a business. Peter and Philip, the founders, were brilliant people, kind of super smart, kind of intelligent, but there was nothing magical about them. And yet they were two founders who built up a very successful business, turning over millions of dollars in the space of sort of 3 or 4 years. And I was a part of the journey. I was sort of one of the first 10 employees or whatever. But it really sort of showed me that pretty much anybody can start a business.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think it's actually become easier than ever to start a company. The amount of information people have access to, the amount of AI tools that are now available and cheap.
Yeah.
There's
I
never
mean,
been such little friction to actually taking that jump and starting something.
and we've sort of lived through that. So when we started TigerSpike in 2005, I remember setting up servers, and the servers were originally in our sunroom in a flat in Piermont. And at one point, they actually got unplugged, and that meant that our website went down because I was hosting it, had a fixed IP address, and was hosting our website. And suddenly, the website wasn't working. I went back in, plugged the server back in, and hey presto, our website comes back up. But not quite 99.99% uptime. But the other thing was we were then, when we sort of graduated from the really early days, we were putting in server racks in a data center in Sydney and maintaining them ourselves. And I think you're absolutely right. The friction to building a startup has been removed. I think it has democratized it in a lot of ways. It's sort of reduced the cost, the barrier to entry. But what it does mean is that there's a lot more noise. It makes it harder to stand out. I mean, we had certain skills amongst ourselves in the early days of TigerSpike that were a little bit different from other startups, which gave us an edge. I could, put a server together. We could put services out there on the internet quite quickly, and then we hired engineers who could help it make it more robust and scale it. Now, pretty much anybody can do, but it means you've got to really have something that separates you from the rest of the pack.
I think you're at the forefront of technology at the time, and that's just evolved and it's kept getting faster. So the people at the forefront of technology now might be in the AI and ML space.
Correct. Exactly right. I totally agree with that.
For the audience listening who aren't aware of TigerSpike and your story there, could you take us all the way back, even back to the idea, the inception, and
Yeah,
the 12 or so years of your life that you built TigerSpike in?
Yeah, so after Global Gossip, I decided that startups were crazy. It all sort of imploded, and it was a bit unpleasant. They went through voluntary administration, bankruptcy, sort of chapter 11 it is in the US, and then they traded out of it to their credit, and they kind of turned it around again. But I thought, gosh, that's kind of that's full on. Your whole livelihood is sort of wrapped up in one thing. And I got a job with government here. I worked for the Roads and Traffic Authority, big business. You're just a very small cog in a big wheel. And after about a year of that, I thought, nah, this is just not for me. I'd sort of seen what Peter and Philip had done with Global Gossip, and I'd recognized that there's no reason I couldn't do it. And so my business partner, Luke, who's also very active on LinkedIn, actually him and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, were kind of trying to get something going with ringtones. So my wife worked for a company that sold ringtones on premium rate numbers, and she couldn't get hold of a bunch of sort of Australia-centric tunes, AC/DC and that sort of thing. So she said to Luke, hey, what do you need to do? Can you create these ringtones? You've got a band. What are you doing? He was a chartered accountant working with KPMG, but he had a band on the side and was very musical. So Anna said to him, you make these tones, we'll buy them off you, and then we'll sell them on our premium rate numbers. And so we worked out how to plug his keyboard player's keyboard into a computer, and he would bash out the ringtones, and then we would send them to Anna, and she would give us $50 for a ringtone. And then they would sell them hundreds of times on a premium rate number to the Australian public. So we were sort of the primary producer, I guess, of mobile content. And this was sort of 2004, 2005. And from there, we just started learning about mobile. I used to say to people that TigerSpike was a company that worked on color screen phones. So we were trying to provide content to color screen phones. And most people I speak to can't remember a time when there was anything but color screen phones. But sort of Nokia 3210s and SMS and all that little games were been going for a while, but we were focused on the early smartphones, I guess, the kind of ones color screens were coming out, larger sort of, they could hold more content, run games, run applications on them. BlackBerry launched, and we were part of BlackBerry World. When the iPhone launched in 2007, we were known as the mobile guys, and so we were inundated because everybody needed an app. I mean, they didn't even have an app store until 6 months after the device launched. But very quickly, people saw what was happening in the States, and everybody wanted an application. So we were inundated with people, and we were just hiring engineers as quickly as we could. We opened offices in London in 2006. We opened up in New York in 2008. And at that point, we had sort of Sydney, London, and New York. Apple and the iPhone was going everywhere. So it was all organic. We had a bunch of challenges around that, but we hadn't taken on any money. And partly that was because we were located in Australia. The tyranny of distance, they call it. It's very hard. The local venture capital environment back then was very nascent. There hadn't been sort of big exits. There hadn't been a sort of a PayPal mafia or any kind of large scale tech exits which had provided a group of people with cash to put back into the ecosystem. And so where we tried to raise money in 2009, 2010, we would do trips to San Francisco. We'd go down Sand Hill Road. We'd go and visit the Rosewood, and it was a wonderful time. But it was always, nah, you're not big enough. You're not making enough money. No. And then 2010, 2011, Aegis, they were eventually bought by Dentsu, but one of the big advertising agencies kind of approached us, and then we had a sort of a mutual conversation, and it seemed like the right time. They felt that mobile was becoming a bigger part of their advertising strategy for their clients, and they didn't have the in-house capabilities. And we had locations, Sydney, London, New York, which really kind of helped them sort of see us as a global play. And they invested 11 million US into the business in 2011. At a pretty good valuation for us. It allowed us to then kind of have enough cash to sort of really expand. And from there, we opened offices in Singapore, Dubai, Tokyo, Melbourne, and San Francisco. We'd had different strategies for different markets. The UK, we'd sort of won business by flying over there and being local. So we worked with the Daily Mail group. And we worked with some of the banks and some of the airlines in London, and that was won by one or other of us going over there, and then we found the right person to manage it, and then sort of grew it organically. New York was a bit more of a strategic decision. So in New York, the advice was that you've got to be on the ground, you've got to be meeting people. So we put in a core team of 5 people into New York. We did that in January 2008, about 7 months before the financial crisis hit, and fortunately for us, we had sort of Australia really rode that out probably better than any other economy. And the Australian business did really well. And we were able to support the London and New York businesses. And one of the things that meant was that we were still standing when kind of the dust settled. So 2009, 2010, a lot of companies went bust. And because we were sort of cash flow positive and not quite profitable, but running at break even, it meant we could support the New York office. And so suddenly, 2009, 2010, we were inundated with people whose previous mobile suppliers had gone bust. And so it was the best thing we ever did, was kind of keep the office going. It was not by design in any way, just sort of dumb luck that it happened. And then, as you alluded to, so we raised money, we sort of expanded our global footprint. We had some challenges with that. I mean, the hardest thing was that you've gone from a situation where you're very money conscious, you're very tight on what you do, to suddenly having a large amount of money in your bank account and the option to say, right, well, we'll open San Francisco and we'll hire 10 people, and we'll open up in Dubai and we'll hire 6 people and we'll win these jobs, and there's lots of mobile work, so you just do it. And you lose that link between the revenue coming in and the cost, because you've got this sort of large amount of money. And because we'd taken on a strategic investor, they left us to our own devices. They were investing in the business for the PR exercise and then for us to sort of tap into their client base, which was great. But they weren't really looking at us to be, scale 10x and get to $1 billion. They had a different sort of strategic rationale for the investment. And so we sort of, opened the San Francisco office, hired all these great people. We were next to the Moscone Center. I mean, everything we did was into the business. We were very fortunate in that Luke, being a chartered accountant, having worked at KPMG, everything was sort of funneled towards the company, which was lucky for us. We weren't Sam Altman buying fancy cars, and we weren't Bankman-Fried buying houses in Barbados. It was literally everything was pumped into the company. But after about sort of a year and a half, suddenly you realize that the large amount of money that you had has gone down fairly rapidly. Suddenly your burn rate in San Francisco is $500,000 a year, and you've only got or whatever it was, 750,000. And there was no oversight. There was no sort of adult in the room to say, guys, this is where you're going. This is your strategy. And if you don't get it right, you're going to screw it up. So we sort of fortunately kind of realized quickly enough that it wasn't sustainable what we were doing. And so we we were able to we downsized a couple of the offices. We focused on the bigger jobs that we were getting. We did the Emirates app out of Dubai, which is, we got some really big jobs because we had this global footprint now. And we were able to sort of get back on track, but we hadn't quite used that cash as effectively as we could have done. And then in 2013, we raised from a financial investor who really didn't care what TigerSpike did. It was an interesting conversation when they had no concept of mobile and development or what have you. But our rationale was that we thought they would help us drive towards an exit. We thought that they had a sort of 3 to 5 year plan. It wasn't a huge amount. It was I think it was a $6 or $7 million investment, but they were looking to sort of make a return on that in a time frame, and our feeling was that we would go along with that because it would help us get to an exit. We didn't see it as a grow for the next 30 years kind of business, and we also thought that without a financial investor on board, it would be more difficult for us to get the right kind of outcome from the company. So we brought them on board in, I think, 2013, 2014-ish, and then fairly quickly, things were looking good. Things were moving in the right direction. Markets were looking good, and offers came in to potentially acquire the company. And then very quickly, the company started getting offers, led by our M&A advisor out of San Francisco. So we had somebody helping us with the money raise. And the reason we did that was because we felt we were so far away from the US that having somebody on the ground over there with our kind of best interest at heart would mean we wouldn't miss opportunities. Once we'd had one offer, we felt that if one company wanted to buy you, there's probably 10 that you've never heard of. And so, creating a sort of a competitive tension amongst buyers is always a key part of the process. And so in late 2016, mid 2016, Accenture came and actually wanted to acquire the business. They were setting up innovation hubs in all the same cities that we had offices, and we were going to be a key plank of what they wanted to do. We got right through due diligence. They had about 80 people inside a data room, really, really focused on kind of assessing TigerSpike and getting to an accurate kind of valuation and how it was all going to work. We all had nice big jobs with Accenture, which is going to be very exciting. And then at the last minute, market shifted a little bit, and Accenture's share price took a bit of a hit. And they had a bunch of deals on the table, and they just cut the bottom. I think they cut the bottom 70% of them by profit, and we weren't the most profitable business. We always had a path to profitability, but we were focused on growth, and we were a high growth business. So at the very last minute, almost 2 days before it was due to be signed, I got a call from the M&A advisor of Accenture, and he said, "I'm sorry, Oliver, just to let you know that we're no longer progressing with the deal." And it was traumatic, I have to say. It was very traumatic. It was mainly because we'd got so far through the process. I think if it had happened sooner, we'd have been fine. We didn't really need to sell it, but we sort of had a plan for our future. And our advisor said, "Look, guys, you did everything right." They came very close. We knew the reasons, they knew the reasons, and they were happy to kind of keep going with it. But then things changed. And so he said, the best thing you can do is kind of put your heads down for 12 months and just really focus on, hitting all the targets you told Accenture you were going to hit. And then we'll kind of pop up in 12 months time with another year's worth of figures, and hopefully another year's worth of growth and a larger kind of valuation. And we'll see who's out there. And maybe Accenture will come back to the table, maybe someone else, who knows. And that's what we did. And then Concentrix were super keen. They really liked what we were doing. I think they'd been competing with Accenture on a number of deals at the time. And so there was some kind of good stuff for us in that, and the deal was done incredibly quickly. I mean, it took just under 4 months from meeting their head of M&A in Singapore to actually signing the deal and us all sort of moving away on July the 31st. 7 years ago next week. So it'll be 7 years since we sold the company in a week's time, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it's a great anniversary. Hopefully you'll get together at least to celebrate that one.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing such a quick rendition of
Yeah.
TigerSpike. There's a lot to dig into. To give more context to the listeners of the kind of things that you were building and developing, could you share perhaps like the one or two projects that you may be most proud of, or even, a disaster? And
definitely don't want to talk about the disaster ones, but I will do. 100%. So I guess some of the projects. So we did we did The Economist on the iPad. So when the iPad launched in 2010, My role is sort of the spokesperson. So I was giving talks on innovation and what was coming. And I gave a speech about this new device that Apple was launching in 2010. We called it the iSlate because nobody knew what the name was. And I had a polystyrene cutout of the shape of what it was going to look like. And I was trying to explain to people that it wasn't going to be a mobile because you can't hold this up to your ear. And we talked about being more of a lean back device, something where you could consume content in a different way. You're not sitting at a computer. You're actually consuming content in a more relaxed environment. And then the iPad launched. We were development partners with Apple. So we had engineers actually over in Cupertino. And we worked on some of the early apps in Australia and in the UK. We launched the Australian newspaper, which is Australia's national newspaper. We launched that on the iPad. We launched The Economist on the iPad. We did a big global deal with Time Out. So Time Out, the sort of travelers magazine, the city guide in London, we did a global deal in all the places we had offices, and everywhere there was a Time Out London, Time Out New York, Time Out Sydney. We worked on, as I think I mentioned, the Emirates app. We had a whole team in Dubai working on the Emirates app. So it was kind of big, iconic sort of media and kind of lifestyle brands were coming to us. And that was one of the reasons we sort of looked at investment. So this was 2010 when the iPad launched. And we just felt that other people were going to move into this space and we needed a big brother, right? We needed somebody else who had our back. We were 150, 180 people at the time. And we weren't big enough to be dealing with some of these large corporates who had, so many hoops you have to jump through and so many rules and regulations to launch software. So those are some of the big ones. There's a whole heap of things. Australia-centric would be Channel 10. In the US, we did a preliminary design for Tinder. So we kind of did the very first Tinder app, which didn't have the swipe left and swipe right. And then they took it in-house and they built their own app. It was done internally with swipe left and swipe right. And so we were kind of involved in, and now it seems so obvious, that kind of thing. But at the time, nobody had used and interacted with devices in that way. We did a project, we pitched it, we did some initial designs, and then they're like, nah, we're going to do it ourselves. And then it became Tinder, and you're like, oh my God, I was part of a very small part of that. So yeah, we had a great reputation in the mobile industry, and it was super exciting.
Yeah, you're not going to land any of those big name brands without a stellar reputation, being reliable, constantly over delivering and climbing the contract size and client values.
And also without huge amounts of competition. There weren't 50 mobile application developers to choose from. I mean, later on, it sort of evolved into digital transformation. And that was when we started working with some of the larger organizations doing internal iPad apps, moving a lot of documentation for training or for staff assessment or what have you for banks onto iPads. So we did a lot of that with sort of Standard Chartered, with ANZ here in Australia. So lots of kind of super interesting stuff, just as the whole kind of digitization of the workplace had started to happen 2011, 12, 13, and then on. So yeah, it's really exciting.
And in terms of the magic, what do you think made TigerSpike special? I think you've referred to the culture and your quite innovative approach to opening small offices across the world. So even though you had a high headcount in any individual office, it would still feel very startup-y. People could make decisions quickly and there'd be innovation and you wouldn't be burdened with too much bureaucracy.
I don't know. The magic of what TigerSpike was able to deliver was really around the UI UX. We hired very, very talented designers who were able to build things that look good, and then we had engineers that could then kind of actually engineer them into software. That was the thing I think that stood out a little bit, was our kind of the focus on the UI piece, not the tech piece. Nothing we built looked like it done by an engineer. But in terms of from a company perspective, I think it's down to the people and the culture. I think Luke and I and Dean, CTO, and Alex Hall were very fortunate to meet Alex Burke, who was our CEO and who led the business through to the sale, and then ultimately he became our GM. He was part of the early team, but we recognized quite quickly that we were great at the idea piece and great at the early stage, but we weren't necessarily brilliant at what was required to scale and the operational excellence that was required to deliver work for BT Telco, British Telecom, or Telstra, or Diageo, or someone with that requires more than just kind of a bit of sticky tape and a hope that the tech will hold together. And Alex came in and brought in a team with him as well very early on when we'd got to a reasonable size, and took us from a scrappy startup who could kind of fight our way through things to an operationally excellent machine in each of our locations around the world. We always provide Friday lunch. So someone in the team would do Friday lunch for everybody in that office. So whenever you were in a TigerSpike office on a Friday, you knew you were going to get a free lunch. and someone in the office was going to do it. So it might be, we had, in New York, it would sometimes be a picnic in the park, with sushi in Tokyo, it was a barbecue in Sydney. It was great. And sort of with sports on Wednesdays. So Alex brought in a kind of fitness thing, and so we had a personal trainer or someone in the team who would lead, yoga classes and that, all that sort of stuff. Which it's not Google with kind of free food all the time and sleep pods and that sort of thing, but it's so important in the startup world, because our model was to pay people, at the bottom end of market rate. It was the challenge of working on new things and exciting stuff. And there's always options. There was an ESOP program that a number of our staff kind of were a part of. So there were lots of pluses for working in a startup. And so trying to provide an environment with young people doing cool stuff and, having lunch on a Friday and exercising together and writing great software and building great apps. I think that was probably the magic of TigerSpike.
Yeah. You referred to it before, of that culture, that startup, that excitement, that giving employees value in the jobs they're doing, allowing them to have control, perhaps, over what they're doing and not be too micromanaged. Is a way to outcompete large incumbents that are actually much more boring to work for, even though they are cushier.
And it also comes down to, what are you going to get paid? If you're paying someone, if your job is worth 100 grand and you'll accept 90 because of all the pluses, but if somebody comes in and offers you 120, you've got to make that decision, right? And so we were quite open and transparent with everybody. Alex Burr, our CEO, would talk about our results and how each office was doing and what revenue was coming in. And when people are aware of that, it's kind of like, okay, I know what I'm working for. We were all very, very visible within the company and working hard and doing what we could to make it succeed. And everybody felt they were all part of a team, all pulling in the same direction. Everybody knew what we were talking about, whether it was acquisition or raising capital or just growing, whatever it was. We kind of tried as much as possible to be as open and transparent with everybody who worked in the company.
Did you have much advice when you were growing this? Because if you started in Sydney, you must have been one of the fastest growing or largest companies to have grown from Sydney. And I remember hearing that you decided to actually take some money off the table at each fundraise. And I really liked hearing the rationale behind that. So if you could give us a bit of an insight as to why that happened, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we were one of the first companies to be in the Deloitte Fast 50 for 5 years. We were the third fastest growing company in Australia in 2007, I want to say. There's a Sky Business News interview on YouTube, so you can search that up. And if you look at that, you'll see me talking about how TigerSpike, I think we were third. I'm pretty sure we were third. Anyway, but the main thing for us, we were in it for 5 years. And that was really exciting because that's continued high performance growth over an extended period. It might be easy to go from a low base to a high in 1 year, but it's hard to sort of maintain that growth. And it's run by Deloitte, so it's kind of audited and that kind of thing. In terms of the sort of the money off the table, so because we bootstrapped for 8 years, we'd obviously sacrificed an awful lot along the way. And our contention was that it was better for the investor to have founders who recognized what they built and had obviously sacrificed a lot along the way, but keep us hungry and within the business. So we looked at what we could have earned if we'd had our corporate jobs over that 8 years and just sort of came up with a number. Basically, we split that proportionally between the 4 founders at the time. So it wasn't a huge amount of money. It wasn't kind of life-changing. It didn't pay off a mortgage. It didn't buy you a house in Sydney, even back in 2011. But it was something that helped us recognize the value of the shares that we held. They were worth something. We've always dreamed it was going to be huge, and yes, it was going to be amazing, and all founders think like that. But to actually tangibly not just issue stock to the investor, but to sort of sell down some of our own shares as well as issue new stock, and be able to put a couple of $100,000 in your bank account and recognize that you're also getting paid a salary and that you hold an awful lot more shares in the company, it just drives founders to, it's the right sort of behavior. You're not sort of trying to overprotect your business and thinking all my eggs are in one basket. I can't possibly make a decision that might jeopardize that. You suddenly become sort of free to make decisions which are in the best interest of the business because you know you've still got a lot of your wealth tied up in it, but equally a little bit more, you're prepared to take a few more risks because you know it's going to pay off in the end. So I think it's a really good thing. It's definitely a challenge to convince investors. So it doesn't work in an early stage. If you're seed or even pre-series A, the investment is in the team, it's in you, and every dollar that goes into the business has to be building the business. The founder hasn't necessarily, kind of earned the right yet. Perhaps they've got to show, but I think at Series A or Series B or whatever, if it's not astronomical sums of money, it makes such a massive difference. The heartache that partners go through supporting early founders, and you keep telling them that it's going to work and that one day you're going to be sailing off into the sunset. and to be able to show a little bit of a return on all the work that you've put in without having necessarily to get to that kind of exit, I think is really important.
No, I think it's a great approach. I think probably Adam Newman of WeWork is one of the most famous examples of a founder taking a lot of money off the table. I think close to $1.5 billion.
I mean, what's the incentive, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then try to buy back the whole company for 500 million.
There were investors would say not a chance, right? Every dollar I want to put into the business has to be put to work. I want to turn it into $10, and if it goes into your pocket and pays your mortgage or puts food on the table, it's not working as hard. But I think the right kind of investor understands the human element and understands that the business is only going to succeed if the founders remain in the company, remain hungry, and remain focused on what the business is trying to achieve. And I think that's important.
You said taking a bit off the table enabled you to stay risky with the business and stay hungry and make those decisions rather than perhaps being a bit more conservative with your decisions and potentially being outcompeted by the next guy that's willing to bet a little harder.
100%. And once you've got a winning formula and somebody else just sort of sets up a business and raises a whole load of capital, you know, like as you said, technology moves really quickly, and if somebody duplicates it and moves past you, you know, you've suddenly got this, you know, this very large part of a small pie, as opposed to a small part of a large pie, as many investors will tell founders.
So you had some like mini liquidity events along the way, and then as a cheeky question, when you did sell out for $85 million, did you buy anything particularly special, or was there something surprising that you spent some money on?
I did. I bought a brand new set of golf clubs from a company called PXG, which is Parsons Extreme Golf, and they were not ridiculous. They weren't gold plated, but relative to what a set of golf clubs cost, they were quite expensive. I realized that they were great and I loved them and I played lots of good golf with them, but I couldn't possibly buy another set of golf clubs for 5 years. So I kept those same set of golf clubs for 5 years, and only 2 years ago did I buy a new set. So they were old technology. Nobody went out and did something crazy, right? We already had houses and not lots of houses. We had a house with a mortgage, and so obviously then you pay off the mortgage, which is a big deal. But none of us are driving Conigs or whatever the supercar is, and there aren't too many boats. And I don't think any of us has a boat. So no, nothing crazy. It's a weird feeling, right? Suddenly you feel like you're financially secure, and you think it's all good, but you're also young. Like I was 40 when we sold TigerSpike. I'm potentially financially secure for the next 40 years, so I didn't need to get another job. If I sort of played my cards right, I didn't want to go and set up another business. I didn't want to get into another startup because I felt I'd kind of done that, right? I just invested 12 years of my life. We'd started from 3 people in a very small room, and we got up to 350 or 400, whatever it was when we sold. And I thought, I just don't have the energy to do that again. And I think that's a very common feeling. That's the key feeling for the first 12 months. And then suddenly you're like, God, I can't carry on. I've got to find some sort of purpose. And I'm definitely very typical in that kind of regard.
From golfing to then becoming an entrepreneur in residence at Investable?
Yeah, that's right. So I got up in the morning, got the kids ready, took the kids to school, and then I'd go have a lesson or play around a golf, and it was great. And I really enjoyed it. You're moving in circles, particularly in Singapore, with other entrepreneurs. And I met Creel Price and Annie from Investable, and they were looking at expanding their fund. So Investable is an early stage VC based in Australia. They've been hugely successful in Australia, made some fantastic early stage investments. And they were looking to expand into Singapore and set up a fund over there, which they've now done. And I was kind of the first filter. So I met with the founders. I kind of got a breakdown of what Investable's criteria was for their sort of investment strategy. And I would meet with startup founders and make an initial assessment if I thought they might pass the investment committee that was based in Sydney. And then if they didn't, I'd say, kind of maybe think about this or think about that. But, so I met with about 150 companies in 9 months, which is not a lot by VC standards. They'll meet 3,000 in a year, what have you. But for me, that felt like a lot. And it was fascinating. I met lots of companies. I spoke to lots of wonderful entrepreneurs. I got a real feel for what it took to get investment from the other side of the table, not from the founder who's kind of asking for the money, more from the person sort of holding the cash. But the challenge I had was that it's quite binary. You sit there as a VC and you make a call on whether you think, whether this person meets the criteria, where you think they're going to go, whether she's created a wonderful business and has a good team, whether he's got the right initial clients, and are they going to win another 10, and where it's going to go. And you make that decision, and then you walk out of the meeting and you either follow up or you pass it to somebody else, and then you have the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. And I felt, just from my own perspective, that I wasn't able to influence or help in any way. It was literally yes or no based on that half hour or 45-minute chat. And on a number of occasions, I thought, God, if I could just work with you for kind of 3 months, if I could just, help you win 2 more clients, or kind of, push you in this direction, or get you into this industry rather as well as that industry, or help you hire 2 more people so that you've got, instead of a team of 3, you've got a team of 5, you would be the perfect person for Investable. You're not right now, and you might be in 6 months if I help you, but you could also spend 6 months and not be right. But that's not my job. So your job is just to kind of make that initial assessment. And having been on the other side of the table and seen how TigerSpike had pivoted from ringtones to building apps to digital transformation and all of those sorts of things, I thought it's really difficult to determine whether a company that's turning over, a startup that's turning over 250 grand a year today, is going to actually get to $1 million ARR, or it's going to, how's it going to get 10x on my money? And I was sort of complaining about this to someone, and that's where the idea for DQventures came from. They sort of said, well, we've got this idea of how can we help people, make all the right moves as early on, before they've settled onto this path, before you have to change them away from a particular way of thinking. How can we work with them in that super early stage and sort of influence them in such a way that they have the best possible chance of success?
Okay. And I really like the investment thesis behind DQventures, which is don't quit your job until the startup is right, until you've done enough market research, until you've done enough customer interviews, and there's enough initial traction to even commit to that first step, which makes a lot of sense, especially given your target audience, which isn't the 21-year-old fresh out of college. It's more the 40-year-old who's been a working professional, who's climbed the corporate ladder, who's seen a big problem and is now willing to perhaps try and build a product to fix that problem. Is that
is, we almost want to take that and put it on the video on our website. No, that's exactly spot on. And it's not necessarily the 40 or 45-year-old who's climbed the corporate ladder and is now kind of got this big idea about how they can change an industry. It's often people who are kind of just a little bit frustrated with where they see the next 10 or 15 years of their working life. And it's fun to run a startup, but our job at DQ is to try and help people understand what it takes to build a business, but also what are the sort of the challenges and the pitfalls and the downside of it. So if you quit your job at 45 and you throw 5 years into a startup and it doesn't succeed, suddenly you're 50 and you're looking for a job where you've probably only got 10 years left to work. And so it is a massive risk. And so we want to try and de-risk that startup journey for mature founders. And for me, that's super important, because it's, I'm very fortunate to have had an exit. James, my business partner at DQventures, raised $2.5-3 million, and then the business folded, and he had to call all those investors and tell them that he'd lost their money, and that there was going to be no return. And Arjun, the third founder, he's run large cohorts of startups and mentored people. And between the three of us, we've got kind of the success side of it, and here's how it might look if your business succeeds, and here's some of the challenges, and this is what it looks like if it doesn't. And then we've got the operational excellence of here's how you actually go from idea to launching something to starting to scale, and then onwards. So yeah, it's working really well. It's really fun at the moment. I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome. So I'm a founder. I'm sold. I love what you're saying. What's the reality of the program? What do I receive?
So we've got an online program. We go through a series of module ideation to user profiles, persona. There's nothing radical about that. The key is we spend between 3 and 9 months working with you, and it's not fixed. If you quit your job sooner and you're all gung ho and you can get out there and do it, then that's cool. We'll work with you on that. And if you just want to extend your time and it doesn't work, that's all good. We don't work in cohorts. It's not sort of a 3-month program like Antler or Entrepreneur First. Whenever you come to us, we'll work with you and kind of try and get an understanding of where you want to get to and how the business might get there. We focus very much on rational startups. It's not a sort of swing for the fences. We really try and focus on how do you win that first customer? How do you make sure that people are prepared to pay for whatever it is you're selling? Do you understand the sales process? Have we got a large enough target audience to make this success? But from how it works, you sign up with us. We work with you for 6 to 9 months. Generally, sort of 6 months is the sweet spot. Generally, we've lined up a bunch of angel investors. We feel that it's not really pre-seed. It's more kind of angel. So $300,000 to $600,000 is probably the sweet spot for that. And that gives you a couple of years salary, 18 months salary, obviously reduced on what you would have been earning, the ability to kind of deliver on the tech that we've done from an MVP perspective, and maybe your first 1 or 2 employees. And very quickly we focus on how do you get to that revenue, right? Get that revenue coming in, and then you're off to the races. So we founded 18 startups so far. We're just coming up to 3 years. So the cadence is sort of increasing from our initial foray into it all. And I think we've had 5 founders quit their jobs. The others are in various stages of it. 5 of them have raised capital. So Zen here raised $750,000 on the sort of very basic MVP that we put together and a deck and some solid conversations and a sort of an idea of where it was going to go. Dealer Docs in the UK raised £300,000 from a group of angels. So that has those are our proof points that we can do it, right? And we need more of them. The ideal thing for DQ would be have an exit of a DQventures company. Someone has gone to where I managed to do with TigerSpike, but we're a bit too early for that. So hopefully, in sort of the other thing is it's a 7 to 10 year kind of time frame on these things, and the rest. So you got to put in the hard yards, and you got to kind of navigate the journey for quite a while before you see that return. And that's where we're at with DQ. So the plan is to try and start companies with the right people in the right spaces, and for the right reasons. Once they've got the idea and they've got their initial employees, we stay as advisors. If they want us to take a board seat, we will, but we tend not to, only because for us, it's really about getting them up and running, but we're always there as advisory because we take an equity stake in the companies. And then ultimately where I'd like to see it is in 5 to 6 years, I'll be on the other side. I'll be selling all of the DQventures that we started back in 2024, 2023, 24, grow for 5 years, and then my job will flip. I love the process of selling TigerSpike. I sort of worked with my wife on selling her business, Cresco Data, which she exited 2 years ago and has just finished her earn out. So she's had she's a successful exited tech founder, and I have too. So we've got a wealth of experience between us. We've never worked together. But the process of selling a business and understanding, how to run a proper due diligence process, how to kind of, negotiate correctly. And one of the things we didn't touch on, but the 4 founders of TigerSpike all negotiated an exit on day one. We had no earnout. We took all of our cash on the table on the day that the company sold. We had pre-signed resignation letters, and then on the day of the deal, so July 31st, I think it was, everything kind of happened. It was all good. And then August the 1st, we were unemployed. We had the shares were all transferred to Concentrix, and we had the cash in our bank account, and that was it. So that's quite unusual. There's not many founders who sort of have been through that, but that was part of our negotiation and part of the process we went through. And if it works for you, then great. If 3 years with a company is part of an earnout and you can handle that, then awesome. There's many different paths to success.
Was it hard? You didn't really have any time to adapt if you had to leave on day one of it being acquired and the deal only took 4 months to arrange? Or was that something you were pushing for to actually have happen?
Yeah, we pushed for it. So the 4 of us wanted out. We'd had the failed sale to Accenture 12 months before. Mm-hmm. We'd sort of mentally kind of checked out then, and then kind of got ourselves back into it. But we just knew that we had 1 foot out the door, right? We'd already made the decision we didn't want to do it. We sort of early stages, we discussed roles within Concentrix and what an earnout might look like. Very quickly, none of us wanted to do that. And we also felt we would be a hindrance to the integration process. So that was where Alex Burke, who I mentioned before, he was sort of the most senior person who stayed on. He stayed on for 2.5 years, there was quite a substantial retention bonus that was on top of the 85. So the 85 was equity, and then there was a larger amount that was a staff retention bonus, which we negotiated. We could have had it all and then paid it out to the staff, but it made more sense to work it out that way. And then, yeah, so we signed slightly more stringent reps and warranties, perhaps, than you would normally, because if there was anything kind of untoward that came out after a year one, that's one of the reasons people do an earnout. You want to make sure that there's no tax liabilities, there's nothing sort of hidden that didn't come out during the due diligence process. But we were pretty confident that we'd built a machine. It was no longer about Luke Janssen, Oliver Palmer, Dean Jezard, or Alex Hall. It was this kind of operational machine, and it seemed silly for them to sort of kind of pay large salaries to four founders who were not really interested anymore. So, and everybody sort of around the table agreed that it was probably best if we left, and we worked out who, and there was some backs and forwards and some negotiation. But at the end of the day, yeah, it was a fantastic result for everybody.
So DQventures, are you sector agnostic and are you geographically focused?
So very much sector agnostic and geographically agnostic. All the company is founded in Singapore and it's still head office in Singapore. But since we started it, I've moved to Sydney. So James has moved to Stockholm in Sweden. So he handles sort of Europe and the Nordics. And Arjun is based between Delhi and Singapore. So he's still the director based in Singapore, and he covers kind of middle. And so we're sort of we're the world's smallest global business. And then in terms of industry, it really just comes down to what value we can add as individuals based on our experience. Predominantly technology. There's been a number of sort of med tech, but not necessarily too much tech, more the med side of things. I've got a background in biochemistry. It really, after initial conversation, it's whatever, if we can, and you think there's value in what DQ brings to the table, then let's move forward. If you don't, or you're not sure that we'll help you, then don't sign up with us, right? We're going to be talking to each other and having each other's WhatsApp conversations and email addresses for at least 10 years. And if you don't like us and we don't think it's going to work with you, then it's not going to happen. I mean, we did have one guy who approached us who was an accountant in Singapore, and he wanted to import Japanese motorcycle parts into Singapore because apparently you couldn't really get them. And like, what value could we add? We could maybe build an e-commerce site and perhaps list the products and stuff, but at the end of the day, we don't know. We did a bit of research, and there are actually 4 different websites selling Japanese motorcycle parts in Singapore. He just hadn't found them. So we very quickly said, like, are you going to do any better than this? And he was like, oh, no, and then carried on with his job. So for us, that's a brilliant result. So I think it really is about, can the three of us really help you? Because you can go through the program, but we add sort of the color and the flavor to the process. We help you understand things. We've also got large networks. James is very active on LinkedIn. I've quite active in angel investing and also in corporate. So we want to help that business as much as possible. We're not, we might put whatever hat on is necessary, but we're here to help you and mentor you and get the best out of what the business proposes to do. But we're not here to do it for you. And we've learned that the hard way. We knew that there's been times where we've perhaps over-egged the investment, and we can answer all the questions, and we know the right people, and so the angels seeing us as the business, and that's just not the right approach. They've got to invest in the founder, in the space that they're in the company that they're building. And yes, we're there to support, but they've got to know that that person's going to win. That's how it's going to succeed. And I guess the only other thing, we see success within TigerSpike, not just as the number of companies we found or the number of people who quit their jobs and go on to run their own startups, but also the number of conversations where people don't necessarily quit their job, where they don't actually do that startup, and they kind of recognize that one wasn't right, and then the next one might be. A brilliant company in Singapore called Julix, which is a corporate secretarial company. The 2 founders of that came to us with an initial idea, which we loved the founders. We thought they were awesome, but the idea was awful, and we just couldn't. There was just no way we could see that making kind of money. And they both had good jobs and were earning a lot of money. And we thought to turn this startup idea that you have into even sort of paying 50% of your current salary, it's just never going to happen, or it'd be very difficult to do. but we love you guys. What can we do? And so they went away and we kicked around different ideas. And now they've set up this corporate secretarial business. So basically registering companies, registering business numbers, doing all that. And it's going gangbusters. And they're the right people to be doing it in the right time. And it's awesome, right? It's fascinating. And because they knew they didn't want to stay in corporate life. They knew they wanted a change. They're so happy. It's great. And they now do all corporate secretarial stuff for all of the DQventures companies. So it's kind of creating this ecosystem of companies which all help each other out. And the other one is Blue Mongoose, based in Portugal. If ever you want to talk to an early stage tech development company, he does predominantly, pretty much only no code development. So using Bubble or all these different AI tools you talked about. So we invested. Blue Mongoose is another DQventures company. Toby had started it in Vietnam and then moved to Portugal. So we sort of help him out. He builds landing pages and early prototypes of all of the DQventures applications that we deliver. And again, he's quit his job. He's working hard. He's loving what he's doing. He doesn't want to hire a huge workforce. So it's all kind of, bringing in contractors who use the same tools. He's got a couple of really cool really competent project managers who keep things on track. And that means that we've got a tech development partner who can help our new startups to build their landing pages. And then when it all starts to work, we've got a corporate secretarial company who can register the business and get all the share structure and everything there. Maybe in a few years, we'll help set up an MA advisory who can help sell them, and all these businesses will exit. So it's all kind of fitting the pieces together.
I can see that you're the visionary, and
don't tell James and Arjun that. They were all visionaries, but somebody's got to do the work, and that's where Leanne and Darius come in. So having that operational team within DQ has been really big for us. Leanne has been amazing, coming on board as sort of general manager and helping sort of operationalize and apply process to a lot of the things that entrepreneurs like me tend to sort of have ideas and think it's great and it's all wonderful, and then you do it twice and then you're on to the next thing, and it's the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth time where it really matters. And Leanne is able to kind of work with the three of us and pull it together, and this is where the process and the kind of the structure, the organizational structure kind of makes sense, and that's what helps you to scale. And that's the same process with TigerSpike. So that magic that you talked about of being able to hire the right people, recognizing your own deficiencies and knowing that you need to fill those gaps for the business to succeed, I think is a crucial part of any entrepreneur's journey. You've got to understand what you're good at, and you've got to understand what you're not good at, and you've got to let it go. And even if there are bits you could probably do better if you did it, it's far better to let somebody else do it and then do it 10 times than you kind of keep doing it until you can't possibly do all of the right kind of, too many moving parts, I guess.
Of course, and sometimes you don't necessarily recognize it yourself. So having a seasoned advisor, someone that can notice the red flags and actually help you with the solution, is valuable.
DQventures, we see our role as helping you avoid some of the potholes that we've already seen. James talks about, on a sort of grander scale, helping you avoid company killer mistakes early on. So what are the decisions that you make that can kind of kill a company? I mean, he's invested in over 90 startups. I've had one. We've seen some of the mistakes that can be made. He's seen some fail, some succeed. And just having that experience and being able to sort of talk to a founder when they've got ideas and what they think they might do, or a path they might go down, and saying, yes, that is perfect. You've nailed it. Let's go for that. Or actually, you want to just be a bit careful, because if you go down that path, you might end up here, or you might hit that pothole, or you might do this. Not to say that we know everything, or that our advice is any better than anybody else's, but we just want to help understand as much as you possibly can in order to try and make the best possible decision, the best possible choice at any given moment.
I love it. So you've got 18 portfolio companies at the moment. Do you have a target of how large you want that to get before the end of the year?
Before the end of the year, kind of ideally, it's kind of 10 to 12 companies a year is what we're sort of looking at. We don't have a grand target. If we added 2 and they go gangbusters, great. If we added 20 and we're all a bit stretched, then fine. The initial kind of premise for the business was to own 10% of 100 companies. That was what we thought would be really cool. We've expanded on that a little bit because we think that there's a way to operationalize what we do, and we feel that we've spoken to a number of exited founders, or people who have seen the things that we've seen and put money into startups and they haven't seen the returns they want, or been frustrated with the startups they've invested in. And so we're working on a program that would allow people with a similar-ish background to us, who've exited a tech company, had a year of not really knowing what they're doing, and now tried a bit of startup this and tried a bit of startup that, but not really sure. How could they get involved with DQventures companies and be those mentors and add to the kind of experience and background knowledge that James Arjun and I have in a sort of structured way that allows them to work with startups, take some equity in that startup. That what that looks like is kind of the partner program that we're looking at. We're raising money at the moment, so we've raised just over $1 million to date. We don't need the cash, but we feel like kind of some of the ideas, even just what I talked about with allowing other venture partners to sort of play an operational role, it takes a little bit of time to put some of those processes in place and a little bit of capital. But we think that if we can operationalize that and scale, not just with the startups that we're helping, but bring in similar people to us who then help 5-10 startups a year, we can go well beyond that to the hundreds of companies that we would found over the next 5 years.
That sounds really exciting. So where's the best place
exciting
for founders to find you? DQventures.com?
DQventures, there's a form on there. I mean, the key thing, one of the key things with DQventures is we're not a VC. If you've built a company and you've got 3 employees and you've got 2 clients and you're just looking for cash, we can't add as much value. If we'd raised 100 million and we could invest, then that's one thing. But we just haven't gone down that path. We are, really focused on people with an idea who don't quite know where to start in startup land and are doing their research and Googling and looking at Techstars and reading about everything it takes to start a company. That's the kind of person who's the ideal candidate to come and talk to us and see if we can help you. And if you've worked it all out for yourself, definitely go for it. We can answer the phone and what have you, but if you feel that we could add enough value as a part of the process and you reckon that we can be we sort of talk about ourselves as a co-founder as a service kind of model. We're a co-founder. I mean, I've put the t-shirt on and I've walked around conferences for one of our portfolio companies. I've, got email addresses with all the companies and we'll do what it takes to see if this business is going to work because, that's what it's all about. And so DQventures.com, there's a form on there, explains the whole process. Connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with James on LinkedIn, probably James because he's much better at LinkedIn than I am. But get in touch and have a conversation because it doesn't cost anything to do that. We're fairly sort of circumspect about the companies that we do take on. We're sort of, there's a process. We have a couple of different interviews and we're trying to refine that a little bit. But really, whoever you work with in the early stages of a business, you're going to be working with for a long time. So you've got to make sure you're going to work, you're going to enjoy the process.
Well, look, this has been a great episode. Thank you very much for your time, Oliver. All those links will be in the description below. Just thank you. Thank you very much. I've learned so much. I'm sure everyone else has as well.